You know, some crimes are just about greed, and others, they're about a deep personal betrayal. This story is about the devastating place where those two things intersect. It's about a man who built this incredible legend promising justice to the broken, only to steal from them when they had absolutely nothing left to lose.
For decades, the name Tom Girardi meant something. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was this legal institution, a celebrated warrior for the little guy. But behind that facade, behind the image of a champion, a truly monstrous crime was unfolding, step by meticulous step. This is the story of how a hero was unmasked as a predator, and how the very systems that were supposed to stop him somehow became his shield.
To really grasp the true evil of this betrayal, we can't start with him. We have to start with his victims. And these weren't just people having a bad day. These were people living through the absolute worst moments of their lives, desperately looking for help. I want you to just imagine a quiet neighborhood evening, suddenly torn apart by a pillar of fire. That was September 2010. A PG&E gas line detonated under San Bruno, California, and it unleashed an inferno that basically wiped a neighborhood off the map. For the Rugomez family, it was the beginning of a nightmare that, honestly, they would never truly wake up from. Joe Gomez was completely engulfed in that blast. He somehow survived, but with burns across nearly his entire body. His girlfriend wasn't so lucky. The family lost everything: their home, their health, their future. And in that moment of just profound vulnerability, they needed a champion. So they hired the most famous one they could possibly find, Tom Girardi. So Girardi does his job. He wins them a big settlement. But then he does something that legal experts would later call a brazen 5-alarm ethics violation. He asks them, instead of putting their money in a protected trust account, which is a lawyer's most sacred duty, he asks if he can invest it for them. It was the first move, the critical step in the theft. And in their grief, of course, they trusted him. A couple of small, erratic payments showed up. And then, just silence. When the family started calling, Girardi's office unleashed this blizzard of lies. It was tax issues, court delays, processing errors. Every single excuse was a carefully crafted fiction designed to hide one simple, horrifying truth. Their money was already gone. What's so insidious here is the psychology of it all. In actual voicemails, you can hear Girardi himself, his voice so calm, so reassuring, performing this role of a concerned friend. He's pleading with them, saying things like, "Don't be mad at me." He's managing their emotions while he's actively liquidating their entire future. It wasn't just theft. It was a campaign of intimate psychological warfare. So who was this man? I mean, how do you build a 60-year career on the image of a populist hero, only to become a parasite to the very people you claim to serve? To understand the crime, you really have to understand the myth he built around himself. You see, there were two Tom Girardis. The one the public saw was this legal giant, the real-life hero of the Aaron Brockovich movie, a man who won billions for the little guy. But the private reality, the one laid bare by federal prosecutors, well, that was the reality of a common thief, an embezzler who stole from the families of plane crash victims, from cancer patients, from crippled clients, and left them completely destitute. You have to understand the kind of power he had. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was an institution. He had judges in his pocket and politicians on speed dial. And that towering reputation, it became his greatest weapon. It was this shield of perceived integrity, so absolute that it seemed totally inconceivable that he could be a criminal. And that is exactly how this fraud survived, right out in plain sight for decades. And all that time, behind this fortress of reputation, a river of stolen client money was just flowing right out of his firm's trust accounts. And where was it going? It was funding a lifestyle of such staggering opulence, a spectacle that was being broadcast to the whole world on reality television. Just look at this number, over $25 million. That's the amount, according to federal prosecutors and bankruptcy trustees, that Girardi's law firm diverted to an entertainment company run by his wife, Erika Jayne. And the court documents are crystal clear. This was not firm profit. This sum included client money, stolen money. And this is the grotesque reality of the crime. While Joe Rugomez was enduring agonizing skin grafts, fighting for his life, the money that was meant for his lifelong care was allegedly paying for glam squads, private jets, and this curated illusion of limitless wealth on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills.
One person's unimaginable tragedy became another family's television storyline. The playbook for this fraud was remarkably simple, and he just repeated it over and over again for years. Step 1. Win a huge settlement for a deeply vulnerable client. Step 2. Deposit the funds into a client trust account, just like the law requires. Step 3, and this is the crime, illegally transfer the client's portion to other accounts, to pay off other debts, to fund their lifestyle. And then Step 4, lie. Lie repeatedly, personally, to the victims who are begging for the money that is rightfully theirs. A fraud of this duration, of this scale, it just doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not the work of one man. It requires a system around him that is either unwilling or unable to see what's right in front of its face. Which brings us to the obvious question. Where were the watchdogs? The numbers, they tell a story of breathtaking institutional failure. Over the course of 4 decades, the State Bar of California, the agency whose entire job is to police lawyers, opened 205 separate disciplinary investigations into Tom Girardi. And these weren't new problems. These complaints go all the way back to the early 1980s. For 40 years, clients were filing grievances, many of them alleging the exact same misconduct, mishandling client funds, that finally brought him down. The alarm bells were ringing loud and clear for decades. And here is the most damning number of all. Out of those 205 cases, spanning 40 years of complaints, how many times did the State Bar publicly discipline Tom Girardi before his entire empire finally imploded? 0. Not once. The system never warned the public. After the whole thing collapsed, the State Bar conducted its own investigation, and they were forced to admit the obvious. They cited serious failures in their own system and acknowledged that Girardi had caused irreparable harm to people they could have and absolutely should have protected. It was a formal confession. The watchdog had been asleep at its post. In late 2020, the dam finally broke. A federal judge, seeing clear evidence that Girardi had stolen from the families of plane crash victims, froze his assets. The firm collapsed into bankruptcy. The legend was disbarred. And what followed was a legal reckoning, but for his victims, it's a form of justice that feels sickeningly hollow. So what does the final accounting look like? Well, federal indictments charged him with stealing over $18 million, but the court ordered him to pay back just a tiny fraction of that, a little over $2 million. That enormous gap, that represents a lifetime of security, of medical care, of peace of mind that was stolen from his victims and will never, ever be recovered. And for that crime, he was sentenced to just over 7 years in federal prison. By the time he was sentenced, Tom Girardi was 86 years old. His legal empire was dust. And according to his own doctors, so was his mind. Diagnosed with late-onset Alzheimer's and living in a memory care facility, his lawyers argued that he didn't even have the mental capacity to understand his punishment, making prison, for him, a sentence almost entirely without meaning. And this brings us to the central haunting question of the entire Tom Girardi saga. The victims will never be made whole. The man responsible is now an ailing old man, arguably beyond the reach of any true retribution. The institution that failed to stop him for 40 years has apologized, but the damage is permanent. And it leaves all of us with a question that has no easy answer. In a case like this, what does justice even look like?